I actually had someone tell me, you should think about doing a PhD instead. There was a professor at Bradley, and I said, well, I already took a job. And he said, well, I can fix that. It's true. That's what he said. He told me the next day. I called the guy, and he said, go ahead.
This is the Gies Download, a podcast from the University of Illinois' Gies College of Business. I'm your host, Tim Sinclair, and today, my guest is Larry DeBrock, Dean Emeritus and Professor Emeritus of Finance at Gies. Larry spent more than 40 years at the University of Illinois, retiring, or mostly retiring, just a few years ago. Most career paths wind and shift and meander for a while, but Larry's didn't. Quite the opposite, in fact. The former dean's time in education has looked much more like a straight line. And, as you'll hear, it has definitely come full circle. I really just wanted to start with, when you were, let's say, elementary school or junior high, high school, even into college, what did you expect that you would be doing with the next 40 years of your life versus what you ended up doing with the last 40 years or so?
That's a good question. Well, I grew up on a small farm in basically northern Illinois, about an hour north of Peoria. 300 acres of corn and beans, a few head of cattle, and 7 milk cows and 40 chickens. My graduating class had 29 students in it, 13 boys and 16 girls. Basically, very few people ever went to college there. It was a rural area, and lots of people farmed or worked at International Harvester or John Deere because it was pretty close to the Quad Cities. So I did go to college, obviously, a place in Peoria called Bradley University. And I did that because I wanted to be an engineer. I was good at math, and it turns out I was really good at math, and I basically just decided to do math instead of engineering. And I ended up going to Cornell to get a PhD in economics because economists need to know a lot of math. And so some guys at Bradley said, you should go out and get yourself a PhD in economics because you know an awful lot of math and it'll help you out in that particular field. So I did. And I got an offer from Illinois. I got several offers, but I took the one from Illinois because I grew up in Illinois and I said, this looks like a nice place. And that's where I've been ever since.
Was your goal, once you were getting the PhD and decided, that working for John Deere or working as an engineer or whatever other routes you had considered weren't going to be your path, did you plan to teach or did you plan to get out there into the working world and do?
My wife and I agreed that I was going to take a job. I got a pretty nice job offer from a economics consulting office in Boston, and they wanted somebody like me in the sense that I had written some papers on technological change, and so they wanted me to come work for them, and I thought that would be a great idea. They offered a significant amount of money compared to what I thought I was worth at the time. But it turns out one of my advisors at Bradley, I told him what I was going to do, and he said, well, what offers do you have? And I told him I had an offer from different schools, Purdue, Illinois, and stuff like that. And he said, well, you should definitely go the academic route. You can always go later to the non-academic route, but if you go non-academic to begin with, it's going to be harder for you to get back in because you're going to have you have different barriers if you've gone out to the private sector first and then decide you're going to come back to academics. You can always go to academics, and if you don't like it, go back to the private sector. So I said, okay. So I took the Illinois offer, and he was right. I was quite happy being an instructor here, and it worked out well.
Before you became dean, and it was easy when people said, so what do you do for a living? You would, it's easy to say I'm dean of, whatever school and whatever. But before then, how did you describe what you did? Or maybe better asked, what were you hoping that you were teaching students to be able to do when they got to the working world? Your life's work was what?
My life's work was teaching microeconomics, and you know, I'm kind of I'll probably say this again sometime during this interview, but I'm kind of an elitist about this. I think microeconomics is an incredibly important subject that all of our students should take. I think, the only way you can actually understand how to read the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times is to understand how markets work and how prices are formed and how profits go up or go down. And so that's kind of what I did. I taught microeconomics for 40 years. I started teaching that basically to undergrads early on when I was here, but then later they moved me into the MBA program, which in those days was all residential, right? It was a 2-year. People lived here in Champaign-Urbana and got an MBA in 2 years. And in about 1993, I started teaching the microeconomics course in there, and I taught it all the way up until I became dean.
Let's say one of the two of us would like about a 7th grade definition of microeconomics. How would you describe that to those who need the refresher?
The easiest description of it is just to look it up in the dictionary. It says microeconomics is the study of the problems of allocation of scarce goods and services. And so essentially microeconomics says somehow there's not enough to go around. That's what scarcity means. There's never enough to go around. And essentially for perhaps the vast amount of recorded history, people who decided who got what were the king or the emperor or the dictator or whatever. They would say, okay, you're going to get this, you're going to get this, you're going to get this. And then essentially what we call Western economics is sort of evolved, and people started to understand that, in fact, markets could do this for us. So that you could have a place where prices would be formed, and the prices, if products are incredibly scarce, prices would be very high. If products are not scarce at all, prices will be very low. And in the meantime, people will voluntarily decide to go into a line of business and make a certain product, whether it's automobiles or widgets or sourdough bread or whatever. They'll make this and they'll keep doing it as long as people give them enough money that it makes them a worthwhile living. And that's kind of how microeconomics works. Is that we figure out how do economies handle the issue that we just don't have enough to go around.
It's probably hard to narrow down 40 years of teaching and research and leadership, but what is something that you feel like most people don't know but should know that you've learned in your time, or something you discovered in your research that was a big surprise to you that impacts more of us than we even realize impacts us? I think a lot of people are kind of blind to a lot of this stuff, but you're on the inside. What have you learned that you think everybody needs to know?
First of all, I'll repeat what I said a minute ago, and that is I really think people need to figure out how markets work. People just guess and say, well, my mom, for example, will say, well, that's, those prices were just set by corporations to take our money. Well, that's not quite correct. I mean, these things, it's true. Corporations will have some control over prices, but not very much. I mean, Honda can't really raise its price of cars very much because Toyota's right there, and they're making almost comparable cars, and so there is competition there, and that's kind of how the process works. Is that lots of people think that when the gas prices went up, that it was, that essentially there was the oil companies were out to try and make more money. Well, I don't think that's probably pretty not true. What was going on there was that there was just a lot of a shortage of that particular product. And as I said earlier, when things are very scarce and when they get scarcer, prices are going to go up. I don't care if it's, if the price of beef is higher today than it was a year ago, that's true. Well, that's because there's just not enough. There's not as much of that around as there is. Price of pork, It's pretty low because there's still a pretty good pork market out there, but there's not so much in the beef market, and so those prices are going to change to reflect scarcity.
So it's not just because Circle K wants more of my money.
That's right. That's right.
Um, how has education, how has the University of Illinois, the College of Business changed in 40 years? I would imagine you have to be one of the longest tenured. What have you seen, and I'm sure you can't boil it all down, but what have you seen during your time there in terms of how things have progressed?
There's several ways to look at this. One is you could look at education. And, our graduate education in the College of Business, ever since I've been here, when I arrived back in 1979, it's a long time ago, the accounting department was either number one or number two in the country, depending on whether you were reading, whether, it would be University of Texas or at Austin or Illinois. And they would swap back and forth, depending on if you're looking at, U.S. News and World Report or Business Week or whatever the rating service was. So we've always been extremely strong in graduate education. Same with the finance, the master's in the finance program and the master's in management and our marketing programs at graduate level. But I think what's different now compared to what it was like when I first got here is I think the quality of the undergraduate program here is really amazing. And it's grown significantly, basically since about the year 2000. It started to switch around. And what happened is we got a lot more people who wanted to come to the University of Illinois. And I think some of that was because they understood that it was a relatively inexpensive opportunity to get a really good education. It's a standout public university. And if you're a student in Illinois, you got the Illinois tuition rate. You could go to another standout public institution like Michigan and get a great undergraduate degree in business, but you have to pay a lot more money because you're an out-of-state student. So we have the advantage of having this giant sea of a remarkably lot of people up in the Chicago area. The city of Chicago, as well as the collar counties, produce an awful lot of people who end up going to college. And we have been able to get more and more of a strong group out of that. And as a result, we've got people who have just excellent income and credentials. Our placement rate is just, our undergraduate placement rate is a number that every parent in the country would want when you tell them it's 98 to 99% placement rate. That's what you want. You're going to go to a good school and you're going to get a good job out of it. And that, I think, is really what's helped a lot, in the sense that we got stronger because our undergraduates have been so strong. Our graduate program always was strong. And then we have been able to get a lot of people to come, a lot of faculty to come to Champaign-Urbana. It's a great, we have a great advantage here, and that is that houses are, basically 20% of the prices if you're going to work at Berkeley, or if you're going to work at UCLA, or you're going to work at University of Santa Barbara, all those places, let alone Boston and New York City. If you're going to work at NYU, it's just very expensive compared to what you can get here in Champaign. Prices are pretty cheap for houses, and it has allowed us to become very aggressive in recruiting over the years, in getting people who are having 2 or 3 children, and they're in a three-story walk-up in Manhattan, and they got to get their groceries up there, and they only got 2 bedrooms because, and here in Champaign, we got we have nice grocery stores, lots of them, and we have big houses and yards, and so we've been able to capitalize on that and become pretty aggressive in getting some great faculty.
I will say the irony is not lost that the professor of microeconomics is talking about the markets when it comes to why Champaign is such a great place to live.
That's right. It is true.
I would imagine there are some, perhaps, who started in the year you started with the University of Illinois back in the late 70s, who aren't maybe huge fans of online learning and IMBAs and all sorts of things. Where do you stand on, how technology has worked its way into the classroom? Do you feel the same now as you would have 5 or 10 years ago? Talk me through that.
Yeah, this is a difficult topic in the sense that you're definitely correct, and it doesn't have to be people who came back in the 70s or even the early 80s. There's, there are more than a few people who think that that's not the way we should be doing it. We should be teaching. We should be standing in front of students and face to face and teaching that way. And I'm sympathetic to people who have that view. My experience of teaching in the online has been exactly the opposite. I think it's great, and I'll tell you why. I first stumbled into this when I was teaching in the executive MBA program that we had. We no longer have that program, but we had an executive MBA in Chicago. It was a program where every other weekend, students would come in on Thursday night, and then we would have classes all day Friday and all day Saturday. And faculty had different schedules. Okay, so I would do that for 4 weekends, which since it was every other weekend, it was basically 2 months of doing that. And when I became dean, I had to go once for one of those weekends to China. That meant it was actually over the weekend, so I couldn't take my class in there. And but there was a person here at the College of Business who was basically running what we called e-learning at the time. And she said, what you really need to do is you need to do a flipped classroom effect. And I said, what's that mean? And she said, well, the traditional classroom is you will go in as a faculty member and you'll stand up in the front like the sage on the stage and you'll talk to students and then you'll make them have assignments and go home and work on this stuff. And they'll be trying to solve these problems at their house and they'll come back the next time and you'll now say, oh, how'd that go? Here's the new lecture. And I give another lecture. That was the old school, but the flipped classroom is you do it the opposite. So the faculty member in a flipped classroom will actually record the video. He or she will sit in front of a high definition camera with a nice microphone and do their video along with drawing things on a blackboard or in my case, I did it on a tablet PC. And you upload that and the students then they are on their own to read all the content. And then when you go to class, that's when you work out problem sets. That's when you take the front page of the New York Times and figure out, explain to me exactly why this is happening. Can who wants to talk about why this is happening here and explain it? Because that's the material that we've just been talking about. And it turns out students love this because sometimes I talk too fast, but the other thing that's nice about it is that they can go back. If they don't quite understand it, they can just back it up and do another 5 minutes back. They just back it up and say, what did he really say there? And just replay that 5 minutes, maybe 4 times before they finally understand it. So I did that. I recorded the entire Friday and Saturday's worth of lectures I would have had to do and put it up there. And the students went crazy over it. They said, this is the best ever. We can just work on it in our house. We can get together with our teams because they all had teams in those days. It was sort of a big thing in executive MBA was you had organized teams and they would get together and they would have a team session and watch that stuff and eat popcorn and figure out what was going on. And then when we did classes, I would just sort of work out answers for different problem sets. So that was my first experience with this. And I think it works great. I mean, here in the IMBA, we all record, every faculty member records his or her lectures and the students watch the lectures. And then they have office hours. We have live sessions where I just go in and they just come and start talking to me. And sometimes there can be 200, sometimes there can be 90 students, sometimes there can be 300. Depending on what time of the week it is and stuff. And we sort of talk through stuff, but, they've got all the lectures completely all the economics they need is in those lectures I basically gave them.
You retired technically a couple of
Yeah,
years
I am.
ago,
That's right.
as I understand it, but not completely. What are you back for, and for how long?
I have been teaching that microeconomics course since I retired. The same course that I started teaching back in 1993 to live people, but now I've been doing it in the IMBA, and I'm doing it one more time. So on October 12th, I will start that course. It's an 8-week course. It'll end on December 13th, and that'll be it. That's my last course. I've already signed the paper, and Dean Brown has a letter from me saying, as well as the department head and the Department of Finance, saying, I'm done. I'm not doing any more teaching for you guys. and other people have. There's a line of people who would like to get in the program. So there's a lot of quality people who will be able to teach that course. And I've recently become a grandfather, and my daughter and her son and her husband have produced a couple grandsons up in Madison, Wisconsin.
I was going to ask, what does a former dean and microeconomics professor do with his retirement? But you answered part of the question. I understand you're a sports fan, specifically a Cubs fan. Is that right?
I am a Cubs fan. I'm a Cubs fan and a Bears fan. Those are my two weaknesses. I'm much more of a Cubs fan than a Bears fan, but that's mostly because I've always liked baseball better than anything. Although I do have an opportunity. I usually get to go to see one Bears game a year because I have a colleague of mine who was in the econ department here at Illinois, but he's now gone up to be the department head at the economics department at the University of Illinois, Chicago. But he has season tickets and to the Bears, and he usually invites me to. Yeah, he does invite me every year to one game. So
you're long suffering with those two teams as your favorites.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
For those considering, I guess, jumping into some sort of business program, whether it be undergrad or grad, is there a piece of advice or a way of thinking or something that you've tried to instill in your students about how they need to look at education, how they need to look at the career path that they've chosen? What's kind of a life lesson that you would offer to young people? Wow, I sound old when I said young people. You would offer these students as they move forward?
I tell everybody the same thing about this question. People ask me this question, and the answer to this question is you just got to keep working. You got to you can't take college. You can't go into any college program. I don't care where it is. University of Timbuktu or Harvard or Michigan or Illinois. You have to work. You got to get there, and you got to decide you're going to do something here and not just drink your brains out and have too much time partying. And I'm not saying you can't, everybody can have a good time every now and then, but you just have to devote yourself to understanding that it's only going to be good enough for you if you really actually put your time in and work for it. And eventually you'll get out. And I don't know of anybody who knows what they're going to do when they're a freshman or sophomore, what they're going to do when they graduate 2 years later. Nobody I know knows that. I mean, I surely did not know that. I took a job. Fact of the matter is, when I was at Bradley, I took a job at Caterpillar, a full-time job in their econ unit. I accepted it. I signed the offer letter, and subsequent to that, I actually had someone tell me you should think about doing a PhD instead. There was a professor at Bradley who told me that, and I said, well, I already took a job. And he said, well, I can fix that. It's true. He told me the next day. I called the guy, and he said, go ahead. He said, if you're going to get a PhD at Cornell, go for it. And if you decide you don't want it, the job offer will still be here later. So it was great. I went out there, but I certainly didn't have any idea I was going to do that. You just have to keep working at it. That's what you got to do.
Do the things you don't want to do now so you can do the things you do want to do later, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, my friend.
Be sure to join us for the next Gies Download. In the meantime, you can learn more about the Gies College of Business at giesbusiness.illinois.edu.